Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Granick-Allen. Is the COVID-19 pandemic and its economic fallout having a disproportionate impact negatively on women than men? Statistics show that more women are employed in the service industries like restaurants and hospitality and beauty and aesthetics than men. And we know that those were the first sectors of the economy to be shuttered in this recession that we're facing. In March in Canada, for example, 1 million Canadians lost their jobs. 2/3 of those, women. Well, I want to explore this topic in greater detail because I want to know, are we not just in a recession, but are we actually in a she-cession?
Joining me now is Krystle Caputo, principal from Bundbury Communications. Krystle, thank you so much for joining me today to discuss this really important issue.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great. In March, which was when this COVID kind of economic shutdown started happening in about the middle of March, but in March, there were 1 million job losses posted, but over 2/3 of those job losses were women. What are your thoughts on that? Are you surprised by that figure?
I was surprised when I first started hearing about the discrepancy between women losing their jobs in the workforce, but then once you look at it, it makes sense because so many women are in service industries, and those were the first industries that really got heavily impacted when we said, whoa, 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 shut everything down. So at this point, I'm not surprised at the disproportionate amount of women, but it is something that's concerning moving forward for sure.
Definitely. And we're gonna delve in and package those industries in a moment. So some women, for example, may not have been laid off or unemployed completely, but many of people are now having reduced hours from work. Or perhaps you're in the situation, I know I sort of am, where you're working from home, but now you're also bearing the brunt of educating your children because schooling's now taking place in the home environment, and obviously child rearing while you're physically supposed to be putting in perhaps a full day, perhaps half a day in the office, in the virtual office from home. Um, and knowing statistically that women still do more of the child rearing, if you will, even working women rather, compared to men, they do more of the child rearing than men do at home. How is that manageable? Is this at all a tenable situation? Can women continue this? Is this realistic at all?
Well, I'm going to speak on my own experience. My kids have been wonderful during this whole pandemic situation, but for us, it's not sustainable. We didn't homeschool before this. What's becoming increasingly evident to me anyway is that there's a huge childcare component that school provides that, that's fine. You'll look at the curriculum now and say, oh, see, school's not that important. You can do an hour a day and be caught up on the curriculum and be on pace. But the reality is there's a whole set of structure that needs to happen around that, and you're at home, so getting kids in the mindset, I mean, you've got kids, you know how it is, and getting them in the mindset of sitting down and doing work, submitting it online with all these there's a lot of technical issues, there's issues with people that that live somewhere that they don't have good internet. So to your question, no, I don't think it's sustainable for any length of time, particularly if you're trying to balance work at home, because it's really highlighting the whole work-life balance situation. And I feel like we're working more now from a home working situation than we were when there was a set schedule of time for everybody, where you could say, this is the time for school, this is the time for family, this is the time for nighttime. So no, I don't think
it's like a child comes to you with a math problem, but then you have a conference call to do, which takes priority in that moment because both home and office have merged.
Exactly. So we really just I'm really not putting that much pressure on them to do a lot of the online learning, to be honest. We're doing School of Life at the Caputo household.
Okay, excellent. So I'm getting back to the economic situation though for women. So with this pandemic, which has resulted in a recession, and we've seen recessions previously, but we've never had a recession induced by a pandemic where women have played such an important role, or such a high percentage of the workforce, have been such a high component of the workforce. So this is kind of uncharted territory here. But you mentioned before that it was the service sectors, the salons, the restaurant industries that were first kind of laying off and shutting their doors for this pandemic. With these predominantly impacted, predominantly female workforce, such as, like I said, retail, food, beauty, and whatnot, some people have said that we are headed towards not just a recession or that we're in a recession, but we're actually in a she session, that this recession is going to definitely impact women harder than it will men. You know, I remember the recession in the early 80s, or in the early 90s rather, that really impacted the construction industry, very male dominated. What's your thoughts on a she session? Is that what we're doing? Is that where we're headed toward?
So I'm always apprehensive when things get really gender undertone specific, but in this instance, it seems like that's the way that it is. I mean, a lot of those service industry jobs are minimum wage jobs, which is what a lot of women take because there's some flexibility that they can still have, to your point about the child care and taking care of the home. So it's worrisome because I've also read the She Session, and there's some people that think it's going to set us back to like the 1950s and into that structure, and having women in the workforce we're going to have to start from scratch, I guess, in a lot of ways.
And of course, if women can choose whatever path, I'm all for women choosing whatever they choose to. If they want to be at home, if they want to go to the workforce, come up with a hybrid, well, by all means, as long as that choice still exists. But some critics are suggesting that the longer that the provinces keep the economic shutdown in place, that the longer they stay closed for business, that the worse this will be for women. For example, some economies are opening up sooner than others. Montreal, where they still have actually high COVID rates, Quebec, versus say Ontario, another high densely populated province, where they seem to be very slow in opening up the economy. Of course, balancing, health, the health of its citizens, but also for economic viability. But some people have criticized Ontario for being too slow, and that in fact, this may impact women. So does Ontario need to hasten its effort to get back to business so that women will hopefully feel less of an impact?
So I think that's a super layered question and a super important question. At the end of the day, I think that really the Ford government in Ontario is just trying to do the responsible thing and balance the safety and balance the economic needs. And as we're seeing live and in action, it's so much easier to put everybody into lockdown than it is to build a path to come out of lockdown. And particularly for women, there's a whole myriad of factors that they need to look at to be able to sustain it, especially if, let's face it, let's be honest, school's not resuming. I'm not sending my kids back to school this academic year. I'm pretty sure everybody else just understands that this year is done as far as in classroom. And that's a whole other issue that women face as far as getting back into the workforce after this. So they can open up all the salons they want and all the restaurants they want. But if you don't have childcare, you can't go back to work. So that's an issue. The fact that the CERB might be offering more money at the $2,000 a month than they can possibly expect to make going back to work part-time is an issue that's been brought forward. So it's a complicated issue, and I don't envy the people in the position to have to sort of legislate that.
Definitely not. And we've, I don't know if you caught that story just south of the border in Texas, where one salon owner, and again, that the beauty services industry tends to be female dominated.
Yeah.
But anyway, she really wanted to get her paycheck and said, I have to open up my business. I have to pay my bills. And she was threatened to be thrown into jail. I think that's still being resolved south of the border. But I'm getting the sense that, again, those hardest hit industries, the restaurants, the retailers, beauty, a lot of them are closing permanently. So even if we do get up running and get back to business, there may be very few jobs for women to return to. Women might suffer longer. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's not good for anybody, right? I mean, the other flip side of this that I wanted to point out was, aside from the service industry, 90% of nurses are female, 75% of respiratory therapists, and 90% of PSW workers are female. So we're getting it on the other side from the female perspective too. We're taking all of the risk and the frontline work jobs, and then there's no jobs on the other side of that. So I don't purport to have the solution to this, but I can see that it's going to become an increasingly prominent issue as we move forward. And those jobs just aren't there. People aren't going to be lining up to go to the restaurant every week or get their hair done or, whatever. So, and I don't want to be pigeonholing it, but we're talking about service industry specific jobs, and those are just some examples. But
Right.
I don't know.
Well, I guess I hate to use that phrase, but time will tell, and hopefully we'll learn sooner than later. Because I do agree, the longer we keep things closed, the harder it will be to resume livelihoods for a lot of people, especially women. And whether it's a she session or not, I don't know. Sounds like a catchphrase, but who knows what we're headed towards. Listen, Krystle, thank you so much for joining me today and for your perspective on this. And hopefully everything at home, the home front will remain very, very good and safe for your family, and that we will see where the economy takes us next.
Thank you, Tanya. And just if I just can say, you and I are a good example of how women are resilient, and we'll find a workaround and we'll get through this one way or another.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Yes, we're survivors, if you will. We're just doing our little part here. Thank you very much.
Thanks.